Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another 2028 election prediction. This time we're taking a look at the Democratic primary. I haven't done a Democratic primary video in like 3 or 4 months, so I figured I may as well send out an updated one. And this time we're adding a few new additions and subtracting a few. We're putting Pete Buttigieg in. We're putting Jon Stewart in as the outsider candidate because it's possible he may decide to run, and I think a lot of people do want him to run, so I think maybe he'll actually consider it. And we have Kamala Harris because she's still leading the primary poll. She's still number one by a very large amount, and she may very well decide to run and give it another go for a run for president. I mean, Trump lost in 2020 and ran in 2024, and he managed to win the whole thing. So, really, that's not such a boon to someone's primary run that they lost an election before nowadays, because you can just win it in the next term if things turn sour in the current administration. So we have 6 candidates here. I've excluded some because I just think if these were the ones, I think they would probably be the top 6. So let's just start out with the first primaries. South Carolina would be the first primary as long as New Hampshire decides to run second, which they probably would. Or they would be paired up with Nevada. I think a good compromise would probably be putting New Hampshire second instead of it running with Nevada concurrently. That's probably what will happen because I think New Hampshire would like to keep their delegates. But let's just see what happens. So in South Carolina, I think Kamala Harris would be a very huge favorite to win. She would get that good amount of support with black voters. I think she would definitely win the majority of black voters out of all these candidates. So I think she would get into like the 40s here. So she would get like 43% of the vote or so. It's really a race for second here. I could see Josh Shapiro being a more moderate type of candidate. I think he would break into second place. But who would reach third? It's really about who gets third here. I don't think Pete Buttigieg would get it. I don't think Jon Stewart would get it. I don't think Whitmer would get it. I think Newsom would probably break into third place here. Just barely. But since there's 12 delegates remaining at the table and none of the other candidates reach 15%, it would be reallocated here. So most would go to the winner. I'll give 3 each to Newsom and Shapiro. So already Kamala Harris is out to a pretty strong start. She has 30 delegates. Pretty okay lead so far. Then we head into New Hampshire, and I think this is an outsider state. I think if Jon Stewart ran that progressive/populist campaign that Bernie Sanders did, which I think he will, I think he aligns with Bernie Sanders the most politically, I think he'd be able to actually win the state of New Hampshire. I think Josh Shapiro would come up pretty close to second because New Hampshire doesn't hate moderates. We saw Pete Buttigieg nearly win. I think Buttigieg would honestly get probably third place here, while Kamala just gets fourth. So it'd be a pretty close contest between Shapiro and Stewart, but I think Stewart would emerge the victor in the state of New Hampshire. Then we're heading to Nevada. I think Pete Buttigieg still stays in. But I think Newsom, this would be one of these states where he has a pretty good chance, and he's really close to California here. I think that would give him a bit of a regional advantage here. So I think Newsom would emerge as a narrow victor here. I think Stewart wouldn't be that far behind, but I think Kamala Harris would beat Stewart for second place here. And the rest of these delegates, I don't think Shapiro would breach 15 or Whitmer. Well, actually, Pete Buttigieg didn't do terrible in Nevada, so I think he would get at least some delegates here. Because last time he got like nearly 14% of the vote, so I would just give him 15%. I think he would at least get something like that. And then we're heading over to Michigan. So this is Whitmer's home state. She would probably definitely stay in, at least, as long as polling is showing her ahead in Michigan, which I think it will. I think she'll get probably 39% of the vote. Kamala Harris will get second here. I think Jon Stewart would get third, honestly. And the rest of these candidates don't qualify for enough delegates here. So let's just reallocate the delegates. There we go. All right, so we're looking at the delegate math here. I think Pete Buttigieg would drop out of the race at this point because he realizes he hasn't won a state yet. He's pretty much in dead last when it comes to delegates. I also think Shapiro would probably drop out of the race as well. So we're heading into Super Tuesday with 4 candidates because at least it's actually pretty even. All 4 of them had actually won a single state before the primary. So let's just get right into this. So Vermont, I think that would go to Jon Stewart. I think Whitmer, I think most of these candidates would actually qualify for delegates in this state here. Massachusetts, it's going to be a huge battle there, honestly. So in the past, though, a progressive hasn't won. Massachusetts usually split the vote here, but Stewart's like the lone progressive in this race. So he has a real good shot at winning it because all these establishment figures are dividing up the vote with themselves. So I think Stewart would at least get like 34%. Whitmer would probably get in the teens. Newsom probably finishes there. I think Kamala Harris is a real contention to win Massachusetts. But I just think with all the established figures splitting the vote, Stewart would emerge a victor in Massachusetts, and I think he would win Maine as well, with the rest of the candidates splitting the vote there too. I think Whitmer would come kind of close to winning this state. She would be in second. So let's see. Then we have a bunch of southern states like Alabama. I think Kamala Harris would be very favored here. She would probably get a lot of the amount of the vote here. I think Stewart just barely qualify for delegates here, while either Whitmer or Newsom probably gets a bit higher. I'd probably put Newsom as a bit higher here. So the rest of these delegates just end up going towards that way. Tennessee, again, I think Kamala Harris would be very favored to win. In Tennessee, I think Stewart gets at least 20%. I think most candidates actually qualify for a narrow amount of delegates here. I think they at least hit 15%. Arkansas, again, it's a southern state, and I think Kamala Harris would be very favored to win Arkansas here. Yeah. Oklahoma, this is one of the states where they voted for a progressive in the past, and with a divided field, I think Jon Stewart can narrowly beat Kamala Harris here in the state of Oklahoma. Well, I think pretty much nearly all of them actually qualify for delegates in this state too. Minnesota, again, I think Whitmer would be kind of favored to win here. I think she would do well in the Rust Belt with Josh Shapiro dropping out of the race. I think Stewart would be not that far behind Whitmer here, but I think Harris would also be pretty close here because she did pick Tim Walz as her VP, and I think she would get Tim Walz's endorsement if she decides to run again. But I still think Whitmer would be the favorite in Minnesota. I also think Whitmer would be the favorite in Iowa, while Stewart would be probably in second, Harris in third. Newsom does not really qualify. Well, I don't know. I don't even think he would qualify for delegates here. I think it'd really just be around these 3 candidates in contention for this state. Let's see, what other states are there in this primary schedule? Because I got to pull it out on my phone. So North Carolina, that would be another state that Kamala Harris would win. She would probably get in the high 40 or low 40s of the vote. I think Stewart would at least qualify for some delegates. I think Whitmer would get some as well, so would Newsom. Virginia, again, I think Harris would do very well in the state of Virginia. I think Newsom would do decent as well. He's a very establishment type of figure. This might be one of those states where Jon Stewart just doesn't get some delegates here. I don't think he would breach 15%. I think it's like a very establishment state, so I just don't think he would breach that threshold there. What other states were we missing? So it's Colorado, Utah, Texas. Oh yeah, Texas, Colorado, Utah, California. Texas, I think Kamala Harris would win this state, but a bit lower of a margin. I think everyone's really going to try to get some delegates in the state just because of how big of a prize it is in terms of netting you a lot of delegates here. Colorado, it's a progressive state. I think he would actually win the state. Kamala Harris would get second because she is the front runner. I think mostly everyone will hit the delegate threshold here to get some. Stewart would also win Utah. It's typically a progressive state in primaries. I think mostly everyone would hit some delegate threshold here. I think Stewart wins the state. In California, it's going to be between Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris here. But I think because Newsom is the California governor, he would have the narrow edge against Kamala Harris here. He would only beat her by like 3%, though. She would actually do fairly well here, while I think Jon Stewart would do. He would get in like the 20s or so, like 21%. Whitmer wouldn't net any delegates. She wouldn't hit the 15% threshold, but I think she'll win some district delegates, so she at least gets like 11 or something. And we have some delegates left over. I'll just give each of these guys 10. Yeah, I'll give each of them 10 delegates. So yeah, that's Super Tuesday coming to a close here. So Kamala Harris emerges as a front runner here. Whitmer, she wins like 3 states. Newsom only wins 1 state. I think Newsom would drop out at this point. He's really just so far behind here. He only won 2 states. I think he would probably endorse. I don't think he would endorse Kamala Harris, mainly because they're both from the state of California. She wouldn't pick him as VP because of that. He would have to change his residence, and that's very impractical. I think he would endorse Gretchen Whitmer out of all of them. I don't think he would endorse Jon Stewart because he's just an outsider. But I think he would try to prop up Whitmer's campaign here to prevent Harris from winning. But let's go. Oh yeah, we forgot American Samoa. How could we forget this one? Literally anyone could win American Samoa. It's pretty much a coin toss, but I will give it to Kamala Harris. I think Jon Stewart, maybe being an outsider, he could maybe win it. But I think that's how the delegates would go here. I think Kamala Harris would just win American Samoa. So now we head to Hawaii, and I think it being a progressive state, again, I think it would go to Jon Stewart. Whitmer with a Gavin Newsom boost from a Gavin Newsom endorsement definitely help her out, but not enough to even get into second in Hawaii. So in Democrats abroad, it's a very progressive type of primary. I think Jon Stewart would be very favored to win it. I think Whitmer would narrowly get some delegates out of there. Georgia, Mississippi, Washington's up next. So Georgia, I think Kamala Harris would be very favored to win in Georgia. Well, the rest of the candidates just kind of get some delegates. It's a 3-person race now. Mississippi, Jon Stewart would be lucky to get over 15%. I think he barely does it. But I think Whitmer actually finishes ahead of him, while Harris gets overwhelming amount of delegates out of Mississippi. Let's see. Yeah, Washington's up next. In Washington, it's a progressive state, but it will be between Kamala Harris and Jon Stewart, but I think he narrowly, well, he wins by a pretty decent margin, but she's not too far behind. Then we have Northern Marianas Islands, and I think Bernie won this primary back in 2020, so I think it would be going to Jon Stewart if he runs that populist campaign, which I think he will run. Whitmer still is in 3rd place. I think she stays in for a little bit longer, but if she doesn't win any states, she's going to drop out. So the next primaries, Florida, Arizona, Illinois, Kansas, and Ohio. So how would I think these primaries go? I think Kamala Harris and Jon Stewart's probably going to split most of them, but I think Harris definitely wins in Florida by a decent amount. Whitmer gets some delegates out of there, but Stewart emerges in 2nd place yet again. And Ohio, this is Ohio and Illinois. Whitmer needs to win these 2 primaries here, and I just don't think she's going to do it. I think it's maybe between Jon Stewart and Kamala Harris again. But I think because Whitmer and Kamala Harris are both establishment candidates, I think Jon Stewart can narrowly win in Ohio just because they're both going to be splitting the vote here and allowing a populist party or a populist candidate like Stewart to narrowly come off with a win. I also think with the vote splitting, it will also enable him to win in Illinois here just because of how big of an amount of vote splits that is going on here. Yeah, but Harris would be in 2nd in both of these 2 states. Then we have Kansas up next. I think this is another Stewart state. I think Whitmer would perform well here, but not good enough. I think Harris would still get 2nd over her. Then in Arizona, it's possible Stewart can win, but I don't think that populist messaging will be good enough for him to win. I think Harris would still emerge the victor in the state of Arizona. And yeah, at this point, I think Gretchen Whitmer would drop out of the race. So The ways it could go is Newsom and Whitmer could just endorse Kamala Harris, but I think Newsom's going to wait it out. I think he sees his delegates as a tool. I think Whitmer would see her delegates as a tool. She's going to let the primary process play out here. I think Whitmer is going to hope that Kamala Harris doesn't hit the majority amount of delegates here, that they have to make a deal to decide the primary victor. So we're just going to go into the rest of these few states. We're not really going to do it in any sort of order. I'm just going to assume Stewart and Harris stay in the race the whole time. So we're just going to go through each of these states. I think we'll just start from the west to the east. So with Alaska, I do think Jon Stewart would be able to beat Harris in that state. I think in Oregon as well, he would beat Harris. Idaho, again, this state did vote for Bernie before, so I think he would be able to win here. And Harris didn't really perform well in rural areas in the general election, so I think he'd be able to win a lot of these rural states against Kamala Harris. Well, Harris wins in states that are more diverse, less white. Definitely Nebraska would go to Jon Stewart. New Mexico, I think Kamala Harris would narrowly win this one. Louisiana, definitely Kamala Harris. She would probably get like 72% of the vote. Did not mean to give Shapiro delegates. Usually they vote like near the 70s amounts when most of the black voters united. Missouri, again, just because of St. Louis, I think Harris wins. Wisconsin, I think Jon Stewart narrowly win this one. Indiana, I mean, she would get the endorsement of Pete Buttigieg, and that would probably be enough to give her the win over Jon Stewart, but it would be close. Kentucky, a lot of Democrats would just probably protest vote for Jon Stewart here against Kamala Harris. Same with West Virginia. I just think it would go for him instead of her. These remaining states like Pennsylvania, I think just Philadelphia would give Harris that boost in the state, but he would make it decently close. Maryland, she would perform pretty well here. Delaware, I think she would also perform pretty well in that state too. New Jersey, it's a very establishment type of state, so again, I think she would do well there. New York, I think he at least gets into the 40s, but again, Kamala Harris gets another win. Connecticut, I could see Stewart pulling off a narrow win there in that state. Same with Rhode Island. It did vote for a progressive before in Bernie Sanders. And then D.C., I think, would also go to Kamala Harris by a pretty large margin. Stewart gets some delegates. And then these islands. Did I also forget some other state here? There's a lot of delegates left over. But these islands would probably mostly go to Kamala Harris. Virgin Islands is a very rich place, so she might even just lock Jon Stewart out of delegates here. Oh yeah, Puerto Rico, a lot of Latinos here. I think Kamala Harris would beat Jon Stewart in this territory. So Kamala Harris emerges as the pretty clear frontrunner going into the Democratic nominating convention. So again, I think Whitmer and Newsom, I think they're probably not going to let Jon Stewart win here. I think what's basically going to happen is, unless Jon Stewart decides to support either Whitmer or Newsom, which I don't think he's going to do, I think he's going to try because he at least got second. I think Whitmer is going to give her delegates to Kamala Harris in order to become the vice presidential nominee. That's probably what the most likely scenario is here. So Kamala Harris would emerge as the Democratic primary victor. And it's just because she's the frontrunner on all this polling. She's winning. She would probably win the black vote in the Democratic primary against all these candidates. Again, I think black voters are mainly sticking with her. So if she does run in the primary, I think she would be a frontrunner still. And I think she would be pretty likely to win, honestly, just because she's winning those black voters. She would probably do well in the southern states, and those have a lot of delegates in Democratic primaries. Whoever usually wins the southern states wins the whole thing. So that's a bit of an issue for populist/progressive candidates. They just don't do well enough in the southern states to really have the best chances at winning. So I think Kamala Harris would probably win the Democratic primary if these were the candidates right now. But things could change. These aren't always set in stone. But this is just my new 2028 Democratic primary prediction. I think Kamala Harris would end up winning it. And let me know what you think of this video in the comments below. Leave comments below on video suggestion ideas. And also, if you're new to this channel and enjoy videos like this, you should totally subscribe to the channel. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.